But the elephant in the room is how are we going to pay for this? We have, the education fund has consistently been rated over the last few years, and if you call not transferring from the general fund not a raid, but that's the obligation that the legislature had promised, and that's been slowly eroded. How would you ensure that the funding would be available for these educational programs, and how would you necessarily increase revenues in the state of Vermont in order to pay for not only education but health care and all of the other issues that we're facing this year?
When I was asked by President Clinton to head up the AmeriCorps Vista program, I was asked to not only run a 6,000-person public operation, but allow us to get more for our dollar fund. And the way that I went about doing it, after spending a lot of time listening, was to bring together a team of people who understood the field and the organization around it, and to talk about how we could bring in more private sector and higher education resources to be able to achieve the goals. That's what we can do here in Vermont as well. I have to tell you, the conversations I've had with large foundation program officers about the possibility of doing early education right and deploying that at a statewide level is extraordinarily exciting. When I told them we only have 5,000 kids who are in that age group, they first think that I've forgotten a zero. And then they say, could we really go and partner with local schools in a diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds to actually prove what we know at a microcosm works? I said, I would welcome you to Vermont any day to be able to prove that out and to show that we can reduce the cost on special education, which is doing so much harm, not for anyone's fault, but because it just keeps going up and up and up, and we're not addressing the problem, which is making sure we do that kind of early education intervention early on. We can do that throughout the education system. We can work together with the business sector, the nonprofit sector, the higher education community, and the national foundations to have Vermont be a model, bring in resources, and allow us to do better by our kids at the same time. Secretary Mark?
I guess I would say that I don't think that grants will do it. I mean, I don't think, we need a sustainable source of funding for education. And as I travel around the state and I talk to people, everybody, no matter where they are on the political spectrum, are telling me that property taxes are killing them. And that, and even when we know that being income sensitized, that's the experience that I'm hearing from folks around the state. And so we come back to this 1 in 5 challenge, that there's 5, for every 5 kids, there's 1 adult in our school. So I think the answer is going to have to be taking a really close look at how we're running our schools, how we're providing services to our students. What we think about is local. Does local have to mean town by town? Does a supervisory union, have to be just a particular area? Could we do more with having fewer? This is a time where we have to explore these issues. Otherwise, we're gonna find ourselves in a position where we can no longer afford the quality of education that we've come to expect and accept here.
We had a battle in the legislature in the governor last year, and it was not about whether or not to raise taxes, it was which taxes to raise. And I'm glad the legislature won that battle. We raised taxes based on the ability to pay. The governor was proposing increasing the property taxes. I think if we left property tax alone and the state maintained its commitment, that we might not be having the same debate about education funding that we are today. And I'll also say that it's become painfully clear to me that the state keeps shifting more and more responsibilities to the school. And that's one reason, I talked a little bit about the two MOSAs and the capping. That's one reason it bothered me so much, because here's state government pushing more costs onto the school districts. School districts having to pay more, and then the state says you're spending too much money, you're doing something wrong. I think if we took our responsibilities seriously for funding mental health services for kids, for helping schools find ways, creative ways to control costs, some of the things things I mentioned before. Maintain income sensitivity, maintain the state's commitment to the education fund. That, frankly, I think the schools are going to do fine with that current system. I look at the number of school budgets that have passed, and it's an overwhelming majority of them. I believe that people feel that their schools are doing a good job. Now, if the state comes on and makes that issue more difficult, clearly we're going to do something different. But I'd say, as governor, I would be looking for ways to say, the state's going to pay for its responsibilities, and we'll push a whole lot less onto the school district.
Thanks. If I could just add a little bit of what's been said, I think there are really two parts to your question. The first is how we're going to pay for early education, and the second is how we're going to pay for our schools. And let me go to the second one first. I think that there's an extraordinary economic boom coming as a society, as we move off our addiction to oil and move to renewable technologies. I think that is going to be what moves us from this recession to an economic boom that's going to make the tech boom yesterday's story. And the simple question, and the thing I'm focusing on in this campaign for governor, is how is it that we can have a governor who has the vision, the experience, and tenacity to make sure that Vermont gets some sliver of that economic boom that's about to happen. Now, we don't need a big sliver. We don't need the Silicon Valley of tech. We just need a piece of the action, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on as governor. That will bring in revenue, which will bring in an ability to be able to pay for some programs that we can't afford now. It will also make, most importantly, Vermont a place where my daughters and your kids won't have to worry about where they're going to find a job when they want to come back to Vermont and make a great living here. So job creation, and let's look ahead at what the prize is. The second part, how do we pay for early childhood education? Listen, I want to go back to the prison population one more time. Right now, we have 2,000 people incarcerated in Vermont at a cost between $40,000 and $70,000 a year. And yet we can't pay for early education. So this is what I will do as governor. One of my top priorities would be to bring together the best minds that we have in the state, mental health folks, alcohol and drug counselors, educators, the whole thing. And we're going to design the best program in the country that identifies the 250, roughly, male and female offenders in this state who are nonviolent offenders, who are locked up because they needed to feed their addictions. And we're going to move them into treatment programs in communities so they can rehabilitate their lives. We'll have the best community-based program of any state in the country.
When we're looking at budgets, and last year we did about $160 million in reductions in services. Many of us felt it was not equitable to hold K-12 education harmless, that we couldn't afford to do that. And so we let it be known that we were going to lower the transfer. And I would say that as a testimony to local control, giving schools and boards time to know that's coming, you all dealt with it the same way lots of agencies had to deal with getting less money. That's the world we're going to be living in for a while. It's less money. And school boards have responded very well. In terms of funding pre-K education, it doesn't cost that much money. We're already funding a lot of it, as you probably know. And a number of us up here took hits when we thought it was okay to fund pre-K education out of the education fund, because it makes perfect sense to a lot of us that that's where the money should come from. I don't think that you have to do much of a sales pitch to people that know anything about education to fund it. What we have to do is, if we're going to fund it properly long term, we've got to do cost savings that we've all talked about in a variety of ways. And one of the things that the governor said, and everybody said, oh, it's terrible, but we know, just as we have in the state, as anybody in employment, we've got a bubble of folks getting close to retirement. And that's a great time to plan, and it would be easier in larger regions, to plan on, here we have some teachers that are retiring, so how many more do we need to hire, and how do we need to do it? And I see those things in larger regions, knowing that people are retiring, are tools that communities can have so that they can plan how to ultimately spend less on education, but do a better job than what they have.